Now, welcome to our today's science lesson, that is Standard 8 Science. Today is on 8th of September 2020. Now, during our last lesson, we discussed about the classification of these animals. But now today we are going to talk about now the feeding of this animal, how these animals feed and what are the types of feeds that are given to the specific animals at a specific time, and what will be the importance of giving these feeds to these animals. Now, under these feeds, we have they are grouped into different types. We have those feeds that we call them pastures, we have those that we call them fodder crops, and we have those that are called conserved feeds, and lastly we have what we call the commercial feeds. Now, when you talk about pastures, these are feeds that are given to this animal directly from the field. You take the animal to the field so that they can feed directly to these grasses in the field. Now, when you talk about fodder crops, a fodder crop, this is a crop that is planted specifically to be given to this animal. It is harvested, then given to the animal after some period of time. Then when we talk about conserved feeds, it means they are harvested and then stored for future use. Then we talk about commercial, these are factory made foods. They are prepared in a factory, then they are either sold to the specific farmers so that they can be given to these animals. Now, we are going to discuss each type of feed with its characteristics and the types, because they have different types. Now, we are going to start by pastures. Now, when we talk about pastures, I have already given the definition. They are directly fed on the field by the animals. Now, these pastures are divided into two. We have those, they are divided into three. We have those that we call either grasses, and we have those that are called legumes, or we may have a combination of grasses and legumes. So we have those grasses, we have legumes, and we have the mixture of the two. That is the mixture of grass and legumes. That is an example of pastures. Now, these ones, we can either, they are either grown naturally or they can also be planted. We can plant this pasture, or we can as well leave them to grow on their own. Now, hence we say they are either grown naturally or they are planted. Now, all grasses are pastures except we have what we call the Napier grass, and also we have what we call the Guatemala. So we have the Napier grass and the Guatemala are not pastures, but all grasses, the remaining type of grasses, are called pastures. Now, we are going to start by discussing legumes. Now, what are these legumes and what is the importance of legumes to animals? Now, legumes, they are sources of protein. When you give a legume to an animal, you are providing that animal with protein. Now, the examples of legumes include the glycine, we have the leucine, we have the cloves, and also we have what we call the desmodium. So if you are asked to give examples of a pasture under legumes, you say number one, we have what we call the glycine, we have the leucine, we have the cloves, and also we have what we call the desmodium. Those are the types of legumes, and the importance of legumes is to provide a protein to the animal. Now we move to grasses. Now, when we say grasses, these are also example of pastures, but now the importance of this grass is mainly to provide carbohydrates to the animal. So we feed grass to the animal so that now they can obtain carbohydrates. And we know the importance of carbohydrates to the animal. We also know the importance of protein to these animals, where we are going to discuss them at the end of this topic. Now, the example of grasses, we said all pastures are grasses except Napier and Guatemala. But now, what are these examples of grasses? Number one, we have what we call the Kikuyu grass, we have the what we call the Nandi grass, we have the queen grass, and also we have what we call the star grass. Now, we have the star grass, the green grass, the Kikuyu grass, we have the Nandi stateria, we have the Rhodes grass. Then also, this pasture, they can also be classified as pure strand and also mixed strand. When you talk of a pure strand of a pasture, a pure strand, it means it has only one type of grass. It has one type of grass. But when you talk of a mixture strand, this is a mixture that it has more than one. Either it may have a star grass together with a Kikuyu grass. That means it is a mixed strand. Now, after discussing the pastures, we move to a second type of feed that is given to these animals, and this type of feed namely is called the fodder. Now I said fodder, these are plants that are just, they are crops that are grown specifically to be fed to animals. And this fodder, they are also divided into some subgroups. Now we say they are grown purposefully for feeding of livestock. Now we have the animals, after it has grown, when it has matured, when during its leafy stage, we have what we call a leafy stage of these plants. Now during the leafy stage, these crops are harvested. When they are harvested, they are prepared for either storage, or they are cut into small pieces so that they can be provided to these animals. Now we say they are cut and then taken to animal. For example, we have the Napier grass, we have the oats, we have maize, we have sweetie potatoes, vine, we have millet, we have sorghum, then we have kale, sugar beets. Now these mentioned grasses, they are specifically cut and then given to animal. They are not fed direct. For example, sugar beets, unless you harvest sugar cane so that you can get the upper part to the leafy part, you cut it into pieces, then you provide it to the animal. When you talk of maize, you cut the maize during its leafy stage, then you provide it to the animal. That falls under a fodder crop. Now we move to the third type of feeds, and the third type of feeds is the conserved feeds. Now the conserved feed, I said, they are harvested, then they are prepared and stored for future use. That's prepared and stored for future use. That is animal feeds that are either harvested, then when we harvest them in plenty. For example, when you harvest, for example, Napier grass. When you harvest Napier grass, then cut it into pieces, then you store it for future use, it falls under now a conserved feeds. But if you cut Napier grass, then give directly to the animal, it falls under a fodder crop. So you must understand those differences. When you store it or conserve it or preserve it, that falls under conserved. But if you give it directly to the animal, it falls under a fodder crop. Now we have different types of these conserved feeds. These conserved feeds, they can either be hay or they can be either be silage. So they can be grouped either hay or silage. Now we are going to start by discussing hay. This hay, it is harvested when it is when it is still leafy. The crops are harvested when they are leafy. Then after they have been harvested, we have some procedures that we follow so that now we can preserve it. Remember, this one, it can either be stored when it is still moist or it can be stored when it is dry. So you must understand, we will have to understand the difference between hay and silage as we move on. Now we say number one, it is cut. After it's cut, it is partially dried on the sun. It is partially dried on the sun so that to reduce the amount of moisture. Then after reduction of the amount of moisture, it is packed. It is packed into the bales. After packing into the bales, it is then stored under a shade, and this shade we must ensure that it does not leak. Now these are the procedures that are followed so that you can prepare your hay. The first stage, you harvest the crop from the field. Then the second stage, you have to dry it, that's partially, so that you reduce the amount of moisture in that pasture. Then also after that, you now have to tie it into bales. Then after tying it into bales, then you can arrange them under a shade, or you can store it under a shade, and you have to ensure that this shade does not leak. The reason why we have to prevent it leaking from that shade is because now if it leaks, it means there will be decomposition of those grasses. Then when the crops decompose, it means after in the future that time, you will get that you don't have your pasture preserved, but it will be destroyed by the animal or the insects or bacteria and fungi that are in that area. You always know that now in a moist region we have fungi and bacteria multiplying, so you have to ensure that it does not leak. Now we move to another example of conserved feed, which is now silage. When you talk of silage, you can be asked which one of the following is stored in silos. When you just see the term silo, a silo, this is a hole that is dark. Then this hole is well prepared in that now after you harvest the crop in the field, after you harvest the fodder, you cut it into pieces, then you have to put it into that silo. When you put it into that silo, you have to what we call out compression. When you carry out compression, it's because now you remove the air inside that grass. When you remove the air in the grass, it means now you prevent the decomposition of that grass. When you allow oxygen to enter in any region, it means you are allowing out the bacteria also to carry out the decomposition. And when you allow decomposition, it means you will not get your grass well preserved. Now, silage, it is preserved in succulent stage, and it's not dried. Difference with the hay, we said hay you dry it partially, but this one here you have to store it when it is still succulent. Succulent means it is still it has still all the amount of water that was harvested with. Then after you harvest, the other thing you have to do is to chop it into small pieces. I've already discussed that. You chop it into small pieces. After chopping into small pieces, you immediately harvesting, you chop it into small pieces. After chopping into small pieces, then you put it into silos, and I've already talked about a silo. This is just a hole. Then the next thing, after you put it into a silo, you have to carry out what we call compression. And compression, the reason for compression is to remove the air inside that grass. Then the other thing you have to do, then you have to cover that silo with an airtight material. This airtight material means it has to should not allow the amount of oxygen or air to enter into that silo, because if the amount of air can enter into that, it will lead to what we call decomposition. Now, why do we carry out compression, and why do we also carry out this airtightness covering with the airtight material? This is now to allow this grass to ferment. When the grasses ferment, they have some taste. It has a very sweet taste, and also it is also kept succulent, because we don't want it to dry up, so we have to keep it succulent. So we ferment it, and fermentation meaning we have to keep it in its succulent form, and also to improve its tasty. When it ferments, it improves the tastiness of that crop. Now, after all this has been done, this crop is then given to animal after a certain period of time. Why? After it is fermented, it is given to specific animals. We have those animals that does not feed directly to this type of feeds, but now we give it to a specific animal. You can give it to goats. It can also be camel and also cows. Now we move to the fourth type of feeds. The fourth type of feeds is what we call the commercial feeds. Now these commercial feeds, you have to understand it very well, because here now we are going to talk about these crops, these concentrates. It's also called concentrates. We are going to discuss the types of concentrates that are used to prepare the commercial feeds. We are also going to discuss the importance of these commercial feeds to other type of feeds. Now directly we start by discussing the importance or the differences or the importance of these to the other feeds. Number one, we say the commercial feeds, they have specific nutrients. So we say they have specific nutrients. Now these specific nutrients, we may have the protein nutrients combined with the protein and with the carbohydrates with a certain ratio, so that now we can come up with a specific concentrate. So we say it is specific, has specific nutrients. Then number two, it is given to specific animal. We have layers mash. Layers mash is given to only poultry that are layers. Broilers mash is given to only poultry that are meat, kept for meat. So you have to understand that these commercial feeds are kept for specific animals. Number three, we are going to discuss the materials, the raw materials. The raw materials that are used to prepare these commercial feeds are either plants or animals. So we say the raw materials can be either plants or animals. Now we move to the third part of it. It has a high concentration of nutrients. For example, when you take a layers mash, it has a very high concentration of nutrients that will enable our poultry to produce more eggs. That is because we say it has a higher concentration of the nutrients that we require to a certain animal. Then we say also it makes up other nutrients in the to make up other foods or other feeds to be also more nutritious. When you take, for example, the salt licks, when you take salt and put it on either a maize fodder, you may get that the animal will have to eat a lot of it, compared to when you give the maize crops directly to the animal. So it increases the nutrition of the feeds. Now, example of these plants that are used, the plant parts, we have what we call the maize cobs, we have the rice husks, we have the wheat husks, we have what we call the oats, the barley husks, cotton seeds, and lastly we have what we call the fish bones. So these are the examples of the crops that are used to prepare what we call the commercial feeds. Now, we are going also to discuss the example of concentrates that are added now to this type of animal feeds. Now, we have number one, we have what we call the bone fish. The bone meal, what we call the bone meal. When you discuss about bone meal, these are bones that are crushed. After they are crushed, they form what we call a flour-like substance. This flour-like substance, it has some advantages to this animal. The bone meal contains what we call calcium. This calcium is important in the development of animal bones, and also it's important in the development of animal teeth. So we say it is help in the strong teeth and also in the formation of the strong bones. Another example of concentrate is what we call the fish meal. Fish meal is found from small fish. These fish are crushed to form what we call a flour. This flour is what we call the fish meal. Now this fish meal has also some nutrients that are important to the animal. The importance of this fish meal, number one, it contains oil, it contains what we call the calcium, it contains protein, and then lastly it contains vitamin. All these are important to animal in different ways. We are going to discuss the importance of these nutrients to this animal. Number three, type of concentrates, we have what we call the sunflower. Now sunflower is also obtained from sunflower seeds. These sunflower seeds are crushed so that we prepare what we call a flour. This flour now contain what we call the protein and also contain vitamin. Now number four type of concentrates, we have what we call the salt links. The salt links has minerals and also has vitamins. And minerals, for example, we have what we call calcium type of minerals. So this calcium, I said already, it is important for growth, development of bone and also strong teeth. So salt links can either contain minerals and also can contain what we call vitamin. Moving forward, we are going to discuss now what are the factors that we consider when we are preparing these concentrates or when we are preparing what we call the commercial feeds. Now, the factor number one that we consider is the body size of the animal or the body weight of the animal. When the animal has a heavier weight, we cannot give it a lot of nutrients. For example, we cannot give it a lot of protein, because if you have to include a lot of protein, it means you will add a lot of weight to the animal. So we give it a concentrate that has a low concentration of protein so that we cannot add more weight to that animal. Unless you need to improve the body weight of the animal, then you will give concentrates that have a lot of body to improve the weight. Now, we have number two, the type of animal. When you are giving concentrates to a cow, is different to when you are giving those concentrates to, for example, goats and also chickens. So you consider the type of animal. If they are poultry, you give specific concentrates, and if they are goats and camel, you give different type of concentrates. Then lastly, we consider what we call the age of the animal. You can't give, for example, you can't give chick mash to hens that are already laying eggs. Chick mash is only made for those poultry that are still young. For example, the chicks. From the term chick mash, it's given to chicks. So this one is the age of the animal. When the animals are still young, you give specific concentrates, and when they have grown old also, you give specific concentrates. Now, the forms of these concentrates. These concentrates are in three main forms. They can either be a cake-like, they can either be mash-like, they can also lastly be in pellets. Example of cake-like, we have what we call the cotton seed cake. Then example of mash like, that is the chick mash, the layers mash, broilers mash. Those are example of what we call the mash like. Then last we talk about the pellets. Pellets, example of pellets, we have what they call the calf pellet. Calf pellet is given to calves, that's the young ones of cattle. Then we have the rabbit pellet is given to rabbits. Then we have the creep pellet. The creep pellet is given to young pigs, that is the piglets. So when you have a young pig, you can provide it with what you call the creep pellet. When you have a young calf, you can give it a calf pellet, and when you have a young rabbit, you can provide it with what we call the rabbit pellet. Now lastly, we are going now to discuss the balanced diet in this animal. The animal need a balanced diet. What is the constituency of this balanced diet? The constituency of this balanced diet, number one, the balanced diet must contain what you call the carbohydrates. It must contain what you call the protein. If you take 2 kg of layers mash, then give it to the animal. This is what we call now the balanced ratio. That is the quantity of the products or the feed that you have provided to the animal. Last part today, we are going to discuss now the importance of this balanced diet. Why do we have to give the animal a balanced diet? The first thing, it is to provide that animal with energy. This energy, it can be used either for movement, it can be either be used for moving and also standing, and also can also be used when it is moving from one area to another, searching for grass and other things. So the energy can be used for movement, grazing, and also standing up. Because if the animal will not have enough of energy, it will not be able to move from one zone to another looking for grasses. Then number two, the importance, it is now to get the animal to be warmth. Now if you don't eat maybe for 3 days, you may get that your body is cool. Now you have to give the animal with food so that now it can also have warmth, to keep it warm and also to keep it healthy. Now the other thing, the other importance is now for growth of this animal. Now we say growth because if you cannot provide, for example, calf pellets to the calf, it means this calf will not have a speedier growth. So you give it the balanced diet so that now it can have to grow as fast as possible. The other thing under this growth, we are also now providing this feed so that we can carry out what we call the repair of the worn out body parts. Now the repair of worn out body parts, for example, if your body has broken or the animal body has broken, these feeds help so that it can now recover it and also continue to live in its normal way. Now the fourth importance of this balanced diet is now for reproduction. For animals to carry out reproduction, they must also be given specific nutrients. If you want to have more eggs, you have to give your poultry layers mash. If you want to get more poultry that have to give you a lot of meat, you have to give it broilers mash. So the importance of giving these animals a balanced diet is now to ensure that the rate of reproduction is high. For example, if you want an animal to give birth at a closer rate as possible, you have to give it a specific nutrients that will help that animal to carry out as reproduction regularly. Now the last importance of this animal to be given a balanced diet is now to protect this animal from either diseases. Now we have specific nutrients, that is nutritional diseases. These nutritional diseases may lead to an animal to die because it lacks either protein. We may get that animal have soft bodies. The animals have soft bones. When you touch it, it breaks up. Well, that means the animal lacks what we call the calcium. You may get that the animal has less amount of blood in the body. This is because it lacks a certain mineral. So you have to provide the animal with the specific nutrients, specific minerals, so that now it will keep it alive and we keep it to protect it from certain diseases. So today, in summary, we have discussed feeds, the specific type of feeds, the specific type of feeds and a specific type of feeds. For example, pastures, we discussed the specific type of pastures. We have discussed fodder, specific type of fodder. We have discussed what we call the conserved feeds and the specific, that is hay and silage. We have discussed the commercial feeds and their types. And lastly, we have discussed the importance of these nutrients or the importance of the balanced diet to this animal. Now that is all about today's lesson. So let's meet on another lesson when we are going to discuss now the type of rotational grazing, type of grazing on our next lesson. Thank you very much. Let's meet next time, inshallah.